It was a quiet, chilly night, and Jason stood at the bar of a dimly lit tavern. The air smelled of whiskey, wood, and the faint scent of rain outside. Jason, a towering, muscular figure with broad shoulders and arms that looked like they could lift anything, was nursing a glass of amber liquor. His dark hair was pushed back, and his expression was a mix of contemplation and mild amusement as he scanned the room. The place wasn't busy, just a few late-night regulars murmuring in the corner booths, their voices barely audible over the soft music playing in the background. But Jason's attention was drawn to a figure stumbling toward the bar. A man, clearly in no condition to be out on his own, was swaying, gripping the edge of the counter as if it was the only thing holding him up. His face was flushed, eyes barely focused, and he had a half-empty glass in his hand, but he wasn't drinking it. He was more lost in his thoughts, or perhaps in the haze of alcohol that had clouded his mind. Jason raised an eyebrow and observed him for a moment. There was something about the guy. He wasn't acting like he belonged here, or at least not in a way that suggested he had everything together. The guy was dressed in a dark jacket, his tie slightly askew, as if he'd come straight from a long day at work and ended up here, searching for something. Jason leaned back in his stool, taking a slow sip of his drink. He wasn't one to get involved in other people's problems, but there was something about this person that felt vulnerable. He sighed, finishing his whiskey and setting the glass down. He could tell the guy was drunk and probably lost, though he didn't seem like the troublemaking type. Without much thought, Jason stood up, his frame towering over the other man. "Hey, you all right?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. The man blinked, clearly not expecting to be addressed. He looked up at Jason, his gaze unfocused at first, then slowly cleared as he took in the sight of the giant before him. I'm fine," the man slurred, but there was an obvious tremor in his voice, a sign he wasn't entirely sure of what was going on. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. Everything's spinning, man." Jason's eyes softened. "You've had too much to drink," he said, nodding toward the nearly empty glass in the man's hand. "Let me help you out." The man chuckled weakly, but it was a hollow sound. "I don't even know where my car is, or if I even have it." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I don't even remember how I got here." Jason scanned the man's face for a moment, then offered a firm but gentle hand. "Look, I'm not letting you wander off into the night. You need to get home, and I can make sure you do." The man blinked, eyes narrowing with the effort of processing the situation. I don't want to be a bother," he muttered, though it was clear he was too far gone to know what he was saying. Jason gave a reassuring smile. "You're not a bother," he said. "I'm just trying to help." He helped the man to his feet, steadying him as he swayed. The man's body was limp, and his steps were unsteady as Jason guided him toward the door. The night air was cold, and the rain had started to fall in a light drizzle. Jason's truck was parked just outside, a few feet from the bar's entrance. He helped the man into the passenger seat, making sure he was settled in before climbing into the driver's side. The drive was quiet, except for the occasional slur of words from the drunk man, who seemed to fall in and out of a stupor. Jason, despite his size and strength, wasn't used to dealing with situations like this, but something about the vulnerability in the guy's voice made him want to make sure he got home safe. He could feel the weight of responsibility for a stranger, but it was strangely comforting. Finally, they arrived at a small apartment complex, and Jason turned off the engine. He turned to the man, who was now leaning against the door, eyes half closed. "You live here?" Jason asked gently. The man nodded slowly, blinking like he was trying to focus on the building in front of him. "Yeah, I think so." Jason helped him out of the truck, guiding him up to the apartment door. After a brief moment of fumbling with the keys, the man managed to unlock it. He turned to Jason, a bit more coherent now, his words still slurred but full of gratitude. "Thanks, man. I don't know what would have happened without you." Jason gave him a friendly, reassuring smile. "No problem. Just get some rest." With that, he left the man standing in the doorway, his apartment door closing softly behind him. Jason took one last look to make sure the guy made it in okay before walking back to his truck and driving off into the night. As the rain continued to fall, Jason couldn't help but think that sometimes helping a stranger was exactly what was needed on a quiet night like this. The next morning, Jason found himself unusually distracted. No matter how hard he tried to focus on his routine, his early workout, breakfast, and a run to the hardware store, his thoughts kept circling back to the guy from the bar. He remembered the lost, vulnerable look in his eyes, the way he'd slurred his words but somehow managed to say thank you with so much sincerity. Jason didn't often worry about strangers. His life was simple, and he preferred to keep it that way. But something about this man had stuck with him, gnawing at the back of his mind. Was he okay? Did he wake up regretting everything? Or worse, still lost in whatever spiral had brought him to the bar in the first place? By mid-afternoon, Jason gave up trying to push the thoughts aside. With a resigned sigh, he grabbed his truck keys and decided to check on him. He didn't even know the guy's name, but he remembered the apartment complex he'd dropped him off at. He told himself he'd just knock, make sure the guy was all right, and leave. No big deal. When he pulled up to the building, Jason hesitated for a moment. Was this weird? Probably. But the memory of the man swaying, barely able to keep himself upright, was enough to push him forward. He climbed out of the truck and made his way to the apartment door he'd left the man at the night before. Jason knocked firmly, but not aggressively, stepping back slightly to give the man some space when he answered. For a moment, there was silence. Jason wondered if maybe the guy wasn't home, or worse, if he didn't even remember him. Just as he was about to turn away, the door creaked open. The man stood there, looking much better than he had the night before, but still a little rough around the edges. His hair was slightly disheveled, and he wore a plain t-shirt and sweatpants. His eyes widened when he saw Jason. "You," the man said, his voice soft with surprise. "You're the guy from last night." Jason gave a small smile and nodded. "Yeah, I just wanted to check on you. You were in pretty bad shape. Thought I'd make sure you were all right." The man blinked, as though he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Then he let out a sheepish laugh and rubbed the back of his neck. "Wow, that's really nice of you. Honestly, I didn't expect anyone to care." He paused, looking down for a moment before meeting Jason's gaze again. "I'm Ben, by the way." "Jason," he replied, holding out a hand. Ben hesitated for a split second before shaking it. His grip was firm, but nowhere near as strong as Jason's. "Listen, I don't know what to say," Ben admitted, stepping aside and motioning for Jason to come in. "I was in a pretty bad place last night. I still don't know how I ended up at that bar, but thank you for helping me." Jason stepped inside, taking in the modest apartment. It was neat, but lived in, with books scattered on a small coffee table and a single jacket draped over the back of a chair. He turned to Ben, his expression softening. "You don't have to thank me. I've been in places where I needed help too. Just figured I'd pay it forward." Ben nodded, his face clouded for a moment before he shook it off and gestured toward the couch. "Can I get you a coffee or something? It's the least I can do." Jason hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure. Coffee sounds good." As Ben busied himself in the small kitchen, Jason sat on the couch looking around. There was a quiet hum of something unspoken in the air, a kind of tension that wasn't unpleasant, but felt significant. When Ben returned with 2 mugs, He handed one to Jason and sat across from him, holding his own like it was a lifeline. "So, do you make a habit of rescuing drunk strangers?" Ben asked with a small smile, clearly trying to lighten the mood. Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "Not really, but you looked like you needed it." Ben's smile faltered for a moment, and he looked down at his coffee. "Yeah, I guess I did." He took a deep breath before glancing back up at Jason. "I've been going through some stuff. Work stress, personal stuff. Last night wasn't my proudest moment." Jason nodded, his expression serious. "We all have nights like that. What matters is what you do after." Ben studied him for a moment, then smiled. This time, it was genuine. "You're a good guy, Jason. I'm glad I ran into you, even if it was at my lowest." Jason shrugged, a faint grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Well, if you ever need someone to talk to, or, a ride home, you know where to find me."